Some families break apart with shouting. Mine fell apart in silence. After my mom died when I was 15, my father changed almost overnight. At first, I told myself he was grieving. We both were. But while I clung to every memory of her, he seemed determined to erase them. Within 2 years, he had remarried. Soon, our family photos disappeared from the walls, replaced by portraits of his new wife and her 2 children. My room became a guest room before I had even moved out for college. I wasn't kicked out then, not officially. I was simply made to feel like I no longer belonged. Phone calls became shorter every year. Birthdays were forgotten. Holidays came and went without invitations. Whenever I tried to visit, my father always had an excuse. "We're busy, maybe another weekend. You should focus on your own life." Eventually, I stopped asking. The hardest part wasn't losing my father. It was watching him become the father I had always wanted for someone else's children. While he attended soccer games, graduations, and birthday parties for my step-siblings, he somehow couldn't find time to return my messages. Every time I saw another smiling family picture online, it felt like I had been quietly erased from history. Only one person refused to forget me. My godmother, Eleanor, had been my mother's closest friend since childhood. She never missed my birthday, never forgot to call on Christmas, and always reminded me that my mother had loved me beyond measure. "Your mother would be proud of you," she'd say. Those words became my anchor whenever I felt myself drifting. Years passed. I built a quiet life for myself. I worked hard, rented a modest apartment, and slowly learned that peace could exist even without family. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was honest. Then one afternoon, everything changed. A thick cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. The elegant handwriting instantly caught my attention. Inside was an invitation to the annual Harrison family reunion. The reunion hadn't been held at the ancestral estate in nearly a decade. Every branch of the family would be attending: cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and relatives I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Asterisk, a family deserves second chances. Asterisk, there was no signature. For nearly an hour I stared at the card. Was this from my father? Had he finally realized how much time we'd lost? Maybe someone had convinced him that life was too short for old grudges. Maybe this was the beginning of healing. Against every instinct that warned me not to hope, I decided to go. The morning of the reunion, I drove 3 hours to the sprawling estate, where generations of my family had gathered for celebrations, weddings, and birthdays. Every tree, every stone pathway carried memories of my childhood. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine walking through those doors as a son instead of a stranger. The front lawn was already filled with laughter. Children chased each other between picnic tables, while older relatives hugged and exchanged stories. Music drifted through the warm summer air. As I stepped out of my car, conversations slowed, heads turned. Whispers spread through the crowd like ripples across a pond. I didn't know he was coming. Did anyone invite him? I thought he disappeared. I forced a polite smile and kept walking. Then I saw my father. He stood near the center of the gathering, wearing an expensive tailored suit, laughing with relatives, as though he were hosting a royal banquet. His smile vanished the instant he noticed me. The entire yard fell strangely quiet. I stopped a few feet away. "Hi, Dad." For a brief moment, I thought I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Then his face hardened. "What are you doing here?" he demanded loudly enough for everyone to hear. I held up the invitation. I was invited. He barely glanced at it. "No, you weren't." Confused, I looked around. "I received this 3 days ago." My father laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that echoed across the lawn. "You've always loved attention." The words struck harder than I expected. "I came because I thought." "You thought there'd be money," he interrupted. "You disappear for years, then suddenly show up when the whole family is together. Typical." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several relatives lowered their eyes. Others simply watched, saying nothing. "I didn't come for money," I said quietly. "I came because I wanted my family back." His expression never softened. "You stopped being part of this family a long time ago." Then he pointed toward the front gate. Security! 2 uniformed guards immediately began walking toward me, and make sure. My father said without looking away from me, he never comes back. As the guards reached my side and gently motioned toward the exit, I realized the invitation had never been about forgiveness. It had been a trap, and somewhere inside the grand old house, unseen by the crowd, one pair of watchful eyes had witnessed every heartbreaking moment. The walk from the front lawn to the estate's iron gate felt longer than it actually was. One of the security guards quietly apologized under his breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We're just following orders." I nodded without looking at him. I understand. What else could I say? The humiliation wasn't coming from strangers. It was coming from my own father. Behind me, I could still hear the reunion carrying on. Laughter slowly returned as if nothing had happened. Plates clinked together. Music drifted through the trees. The family had already decided that removing me was easier than asking whether I deserved to be treated that way. As we reached the gate, I glanced back one last time. My father was smiling again, shaking hands with relatives, as though he had just handled an unpleasant inconvenience instead of publicly rejecting his own child. That hurt more than being thrown out. It told me he truly believed he had done the right thing. I reached into my pocket and folded the invitation one last time before slipping it back inside the envelope. Maybe this was where my story with the Harrison family finally ended. Then a firm voice echoed across the estate. "Stop!" Every conversation froze. The security guards immediately stepped aside. Slow, steady footsteps approached from the mansion's front entrance. Even before I turned around, I knew that voice. Eleanor. My godmother walked down the stone staircase with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to raise her voice to command attention. Though she was well into her 70s, she carried herself with remarkable strength. Her silver hair framed a calm face, but there was unmistakable disappointment in her eyes. Relatives instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path for her. No one dared interrupt. She stopped beside me first. Without saying a word, she gently straightened the collar of my jacket, just as my mother used to do before school. Then she looked into my eyes. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly. I swallowed the lump in my throat, only where no one can see. She squeezed my hand. "I was afraid you'd answer that." Then she turned toward my father. The warmth vanished from her expression. "What happened here?" My father forced a confident smile. "Eleanor, this is just a misunderstanding. It doesn't appear to be. He showed up uninvited," my father said smoothly. He caused a scene, and I asked security to escort him out before things became uncomfortable. Several relatives nodded, unwilling to challenge him. I opened my mouth to speak, but Eleanor raised one finger. "Not yet." She looked directly at my father. "Did he shout?" "No." "Did he threaten anyone?" "No." "Did he insult a single guest?" Father hesitated. "No." "Then what exactly was his offense?" Silence. My father shifted uncomfortably before answering. "He doesn't belong here anymore." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "And who gave you the authority to decide that?" "I did." My father replied. "I'm the head of this family now." For a moment, Eleanor simply stared at him. Then she spoke a single word. "Disinherited." The word landed like thunder. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My father's smile disappeared instantly. "What? You heard me?" He laughed nervously. "Eleanor, that's not funny. I wasn't attempting humor." She took one deliberate step forward. "You publicly humiliated your own child without cause. You shamed your late wife's memory, and you have mistaken temporary authority for permanent ownership." Confusion swept across the crowd. "What are you talking about?" my father demanded. Eleanor slowly removed a small leather folder from her handbag. "I have spent the last 8 years quietly observing every member of this family. Character reveals itself when people believe no one important is watching." She looked around at every relative gathered on the lawn. "Today, I have seen enough." My father's confidence began to crack. "You can't make decisions like this on your own." Eleanor's expression remained calm. "Oh, but I can." She held up the folder. "The Harrison estate, the reunion property, and every family trust connected to it remain under my legal control until I decide otherwise." The whispers became louder. Several relatives exchanged stunned looks. My father stared at her in disbelief. That's impossible. No, Eleanor replied. What's impossible is believing. Your father intended you to inherit leadership regardless of your actions. His face turned pale. You told everyone this house belonged to you, one uncle muttered. So did the bank, another cousin whispered. Eleanor didn't take her eyes off my father. You inherited the privilege of managing this family, not the right to abuse it. Then she turned to me. My dear, her voice softened once more. You are not leaving. She gently placed her hand on my shoulder. You were invited by me. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the reunion. My father looked from the invitation in my hand to Eleanor's face. You invited him, yes, without asking me. Eleanor lifted her chin. I don't require permission to invite my godchild into a home that does not belong to you. For the first time in years, I saw genuine fear in my father's eyes, and I realized this family reunion was no longer about me being thrown out. It was about everything my father was about to lose. The silence that followed Eleanor's revelation was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Nearly 100 relatives stood frozen across the estate's lawn. No one reached for another drink. No one returned to their conversations. Every eye remained fixed on my father, whose confident smile had completely vanished. He looked at Eleanor as if she had spoken another language. This is ridiculous, he finally said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. You're trying to embarrass me in front of everyone. Eleanor folded her hands calmly. No, she replied. You accomplished that yourself. A few nervous chuckles escaped from the crowd before disappearing almost immediately. My father took a step toward her. I've managed this family for years. You managed appearances, Eleanor corrected. Leadership is something entirely different. Just then, a black sedan rolled through the estate's front gate. Several people turned to watch as two professionally dressed men and a woman stepped out carrying leather briefcases. I recognized none of them. Eleanor did. They're right on time, she said. My father's face drained of color. Who are they, my attorneys? The three professionals approached with quiet confidence. One of them greeted Eleanor respectfully before placing a thick stack of neatly organized folders on a nearby table. I believe everything is prepared, he said. It is, Eleanor answered. She turned to face the family. For years, many of you believed my late brother transferred ownership of this estate to his eldest son. She glanced toward my father. He did not. The crowd erupted into whispers. Instead of raising her voice, Eleanor simply opened the first folder. The Harrison estate, the surrounding farmland, every investment account, and the family trust have remained under my supervision since my brother's passing. She paused. His instructions were very clear. She looked directly at me. If his grandson was ever treated with cruelty or excluded from the family for selfish reasons, the trustee was instructed to remove anyone responsible from future inheritance. My heart skipped. What? I whispered. Eleanor smiled sadly. The day your mother married into this family, your grandfather promised her one thing. She swallowed before continuing. No child of yours will ever stand alone while a Harrison still breathes. My eyes filled with tears. She had never forgotten, not once. My father suddenly slammed both hands onto the table. This is manipulation. No, one attorney replied calmly. It's legally binding. He removed another folder. We also completed a financial review covering the last 9 years. My father's breathing became noticeably heavier. You had no right. The trust grants us every right. The attorney handed several documents to Eleanor before continuing. Our investigation found repeated unauthorized transfers from maintenance accounts into businesses owned solely by Mr. Harrison. Gasps spread through the relatives. Another page followed. Family scholarship funds were reduced by nearly 60%. Another. Charitable donations promised in your father's name were never delivered. Another. Multiple relatives received false information regarding your son's financial situation. My head snapped upward. What? Eleanor nodded sadly. I thought you deserved to know. An elderly aunt slowly stood from her chair. You told us he refused help. Another cousin added, you said he stole money before leaving home. I heard he cut off contact with everyone. Another relative admitted. One after another, the lies poured into the open. Each accusation my father had spread over the years unraveled in front of everyone. I felt physically sick. All those birthdays without phone calls, all those unanswered messages, all those relatives who suddenly stopped speaking to me. It had never been because they hated me. They had believed my father's stories. I never said any of that, I whispered. I know, Eleanor replied. She reached into the folder one last time. I kept every letter you sent. She handed me a small bundle tied with blue ribbon. I recognized my own handwriting instantly. Letters, birthday cards, Christmas cards, apology notes. Every message I had mailed to my father over the last decade. Most had been returned unopened. The ones that weren't had never reached the rest of the family. He hid them, Eleanor said quietly, every single one. Tears blurred my vision as I held the stack against my chest. My father stared at the letters without speaking. The attorneys exchanged one final glance before presenting a formal document. Effective immediately, one announced, Mr. Harrison is removed as acting trustee, estate administrator, and beneficiary under the Harrison Family Trust, subject to the trustee's authority. The words echoed across the silent lawn. My father looked around desperately. This is insane. No one defended him. Not his wife, not his cousins, not even his closest friends. Instead, several relatives slowly walked toward me. I'm sorry, my aunt whispered. We believed him. Another admitted. We should have asked you the truth. I accepted their apologies with a quiet nod, but I didn't feel victorious. There was no joy in watching a family fall apart, only sadness that it had taken so many years for the truth to find its voice. As my father stood alone in the middle of the lawn, stripped of the power he had abused, Eleanor stepped beside me. She squeezed my shoulder gently. The hardest battles, she said, are won not by anger but by patience. For the first time since my mother died, I finally believed she was right. 3 weeks after the reunion, the Harrison estate felt different. For the first time in years, its gates were open to every member of the family without fear, whispered gossip, or invisible divisions. Children laughed on the front lawn, cousins shared meals on the long back porch, and old photographs, ones that had been hidden away for years, were carefully returned to the walls. Among them was my favorite picture of my mother. She was standing beneath the old oak tree with one arm around me, both of us smiling as if nothing in the world could ever separate us. Seeing that photograph hanging in the entrance hall brought tears to my eyes. It felt as though she had finally come home. Eleanor stood beside me, smiling warmly. She always belonged here, she said softly. So did you. Those 4 words healed something inside me that had been broken for almost 15 years. The attorneys had completed every legal transfer. As trustee, Eleanor remained the final authority, but she surprised everyone by naming me as her successor. It wasn't because I was her godchild. It was because, as she told the family, a person who knows what exclusion feels like is less likely to exclude others. The room fell silent when she said it. No one argued. Instead of celebrating my father's downfall, I suggested something else. The reunion shouldn't end with another family being pushed away, I said. We've had enough of that. Together with Eleanor, we created new rules for the Harrison Family Trust. Every financial report would be transparent. Every major decision would require independent approval. Scholarships that had disappeared under my father's management were fully restored, this time in my mother's name. Young relatives who wanted to attend college would never have to wonder whether promises made to them would quietly disappear. The estate no longer represented power. It represented responsibility. As for my father, life changed far more dramatically than he had imagined. Without the trust, he lost his position, his influence, and the respect he had spent years pretending to earn. People who once praised him stopped returning his calls. Business partners distanced themselves after learning the truth. Even those who still cared about him admitted they could no longer defend what he had done. I heard very little from him during those weeks. Until one rainy afternoon, I was walking through the estate gardens when I noticed a familiar figure standing beneath the old oak tree. He looked older, not because of time, but because regret had settled across his face. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I don't expect forgiveness." I looked at him carefully. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit anymore. There were no relatives surrounding him, no confident smile, no audience to impress, only a father standing alone. "I spent years blaming everyone except myself," he admitted. "After your mother died, I couldn't face my grief. Every time I looked at you, I saw the life we'd lost. Instead of protecting you, I pushed you away." His voice cracked. "And then I kept making excuses because admitting the truth became harder every year. The words didn't erase the past." "They couldn't." I waited a long time to hear that. I said quietly, "I know." Tears filled his eyes. "I'm sorry, son." For the first time in years, I believed he meant it. I took a slow breath before answering. "I forgive you." He looked up, surprised, "But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." He nodded. "I understand. You'll have to rebuild trust one day at a time. No court, no lawyer, and no inheritance can do that for you." He accepted those words without argument. Perhaps that was the first honest thing he had done in years. As he walked away, I realized something unexpected. The greatest victory wasn't watching him lose everything. It was realizing I no longer needed him to lose for me to feel whole. Later that evening, the family gathered for dinner beneath strings of warm lights stretched across the garden. Laughter filled the air, but this time it felt genuine. There were no whispered judgments, no favorites, no outsiders. Eleanor raised a glass. "To family," she said. I smiled before adding my own toast to truth. Everyone lifted their glasses. As I looked around the table, I imagined my mother smiling somewhere beyond the stars. She had once taught me that love was measured not by what people promised, but by what they chose to do. My father had inherited wealth and nearly destroyed a family. I had inherited compassion, and somehow it rebuilt one. In the end, Eleanor's single word, disinherited, did far more than strip away an inheritance. It exposed every lie, restored every truth, and reminded us all that the richest legacy anyone can leave behind is not money, land, or power. It is the courage to choose love over pride, honesty over comfort, and forgiveness without surrendering justice. That became the Harrison family's true inheritance, and the one no one could ever take away.